Hey guys, thanks for hanging around. All right, shoot.
How do you feel about the pick?
Good, good. Him getting to 25 certainly wasn't a situation we were anticipating, but we're thrilled to have him. I mean, everybody comes into these rooms and talks about how, you had the guy higher on your board. I think everybody probably at some point or the other had him higher on the board. So, we're excited. He's a good positional fit. We love his. Someone's getting detention. Love his athleticism, his upside. Was really highly ranked coming out of high school. Ironically, I think he was ranked 6th in his class, and Anthony was ranked 9th in the same class. They were playing pickup actually together a couple of weeks ago down in Florida. So another high character kid, salutatorian of his high school class, national merit scholar, great kid, great worker. Really produced in limited minutes at Carolina, and we think he's got a tremendous ceiling.
When did he kind of start getting on your radar?
Yeah, it was strange. We had 3 or 4 guys actually, kind of on a tier over here that were all still kind of on the board. He was the highest ranked member of that tier, but I want to say around pick 21, we suddenly had 5 guys with 4 picks to go that we had rated much higher than we'd anticipated relative to where our pick was in kind of trying to calibrate the draft.
Why do you think he fell, Neil?
I don't know. It was an interesting draft in that there was a very narrow variance between a lot of players. I think we all knew that there was chalk. The first 3, the draft kind of started at 4. And there was a lot of uncertainty, but it wasn't, the normal, kind of predetermined selection order, relative to the, the overall, consensus. I think this draft really came down to flavor and taste. And, I think there were 4 or 5 upsets in the first round. If you were kind of looking at it just from an overall, what's the league going to do perspective, if you were trying to mock it out, we don't really do that very much. We just handle our business. But I think there were 4 or 5 upsets that if you canvassed the league, I think teams would have been surprised at some guys that went probably, a range higher than guys would have thought maybe. But that's why I think you're going to see a lot of quality later in the first round into the early part of the second round. It's why so many teams are being so hyper aggressive. I think when the dust settles, you'll see just how far teams extended themselves to acquire picks in the 30s based on the guys that were still on the board.
What kind of a perimeter shooter is he? Is that a concern with you about him?
No, look, honestly, there was one shooter in this whole draft, and he went 11th. So, it just, I think it's a product, Kerry, of this is where we are. These kids are coming through the AAU systems. They're much more raw. They play a lot more pickup. They're not as much, working on drills and, shooting refinement. It's more about attacking and getting to the rim. So, but one of the things that's really encouraging with Nassir is he's a 77% free throw shooter. And what we found is free throw shooting in college is more indicative of being a good shooter at the NBA level than 3-point shooting is at the college level. His mechanics are solid. They need tweaking a little bit, but he's 19 years old, and he's a player that's used to physically dominating the competition. I mean, he hasn't, for a long time, he hasn't had to be an elite perimeter shooter to be effective because he could get to the rim, he scores in transition, he offensive rebounds. His effective height is probably a little bit over 6'7" based on his wingspan and standing reach. So, I think that's what happens is the style of play at the high school level anymore has changed. And guys just aren't coming into the league as knockdown shooters, especially not freshmen. It's not a coincidence that probably the best shooter in the draft is a kid that was a 5th-year senior.
So if this morning I would have told you you're going to get Little today, what would you have said?
I would have been shocked, that he would have been there. We still kind of couldn't believe it, but look, I would have said, geez, that's a great get. Great fit positionally. Culturally, the kind of kid that he is, the family he comes from, the work ethic, having been well taught at Carolina, so he's got that pedigree. He'll assimilate seamlessly because of his relationship to Ant. We always rely on guys like Dame and CJ to indoctrinate these guys into our culture, and I think he's really excited, and I think a little bit of a wake-up call too. I think there's more than a few guys in this draft that, relative to where they were recruited, relative to where they were ranked in high school that, might have gotten a little bit of a wake-up call tonight as far as what guys need to do at the college level to not just rely on what their reputation was in high school.
Neil, do you view him as kind of a long-term development project like you did with Anthony, or do you anticipate him being able to contribute next year right away?
Look, you'd always like guys to contribute, sooner rather than later, but I think, you're always balancing trust, and winning. And I think if he proves to Terry that, he can help us win games, which is what the kind of the path we're on right now. We don't have the luxury of just development minutes, but, I will say, we still have a lot of confidence in our ability to develop players, whether they can play or not. I think you guys will see that kind of a remarkable transformation of Anthony. It's kind of all coming together for him. I mean, he's as talented as anyone we've ever drafted since I've been here. In terms of just natural gifts. I mean, he's not the player Damon CJ was, but in terms of just natural, God-given basketball ability, Anthony's as gifted as anybody I've ever drafted. So, we're expecting big things from him, and I don't want to heap too much pressure on him, but when we watch him on a daily basis, we say things, you guys just don't have the luxury of having that kind of access. And so like I said, Nassir will develop. If he develops to the point where Terry trusts he can help us win games and contribute at a team that was in the Western Conference Finals, we'll see him on the court. If it takes a little bit longer, we'll remain patient the way we have with our other draft picks.
You said Nassir was the best player available, but you
I'm
also,
sorry.
You said Nassir was at the top of your board when it got
Yeah.
there, but you also said he was a great fit. Is there a decision where fit comes into that at all?
The way that we handle our draft is we tier the draft. It's not just a straight 1 through 60. So, within the tier, if it's a close enough, the idea is that you have, say, 3 or 4 guys where the talent level is equal, and then they're ranked within that tier based on positional need. You're never going to leave a guy you think is more talented on the board regardless of position, but when it gets to the point where it's basically a coin flip, you do factor need in. But this wasn't a need pick. This wasn't a plug and play and he's going to replace a guy, that we may lose to free agency. This was best player available that just also happened to be, a small forward.
How much did you dabble in kind of trades and trying to move up or second round?
We didn't try to move up because we liked how the draft was breaking for us. Honestly, the guys we would have moved up for were a bunch of guys that were actually still available when we selected. It was actually disappointing because, as happy as we were to get Nassir, there were guys we kind of thought we were going to take that, slid kind of past us. So it changes our expectation level. But, we did. We tried to get back into the second round. There were some really talented players there. We do have some roster spot issues in terms of making sure there would be a roster spot available for the player. But the asking price got a little bit insane when other teams saw what was on the board and teams were asking for 4 second-round picks and protected first-round pick. And, you just can't get caught up in the draft fever at some point. You've got to remember this is a very small acquisition for a much bigger picture that we've got to keep our eye on the ball when it comes to, July 1st and building our roster.
I know you guys scout these guys, everyone on the board throughout the season. Did you ever get eyes on him in a game?
Oh yeah, I had seen Carolina multiple times, but then late in the season I spent an entire weekend there. They played Miami on a Saturday, stayed, watched practice. They played Virginia on a Monday. Half the league was there for that grouping because of who Virginia had and who Carolina had. So, honestly, I wasn't scouting as much for him as well as we were playing. I never thought he would be the target of the scout, but there were certainly other players on that roster that we were targeting or the opponents. So, you look at everyone. We've talked about this in the past. When we drafted Damian Lillard, I was with the Clippers. We were heading for, a very high playoff seed that year. We certainly weren't looking to pick in the lottery, but you still do your job and you scout. So it was easy when I got to Portland to kind of transition all that information over to our process here in terms of selection range. So, you've got to scout everybody. You just never know when the phone is going to ring. You never know when someone's going to make a trade to move up, and you've got to know 1 through 60. Our guys are back there right now because we're out at this point. That anybody we've called on now, we know they have homes for those players. Like I said, we're not looking to buy in for a second just for another development prospect, but you've got to know the draft top to bottom because you just never know.
you didn't have really meetings with him, so to speak.
Right.
So how do you know about his character and how he'll that you spoke?
Well, it's all the research. The investigators we use to do background checks. Our relationship with the coaching staff in North Carolina, relationships with high school coaches. The guys that run all the high school events. Scouting him at the McDonald's All-American game. We have people there watching the practices. Talking to those guys. Team USA, guys on our roster. Like guys like Anthony. Who have a relationship with him. But you're right. I mean, it wasn't a deep dive with him because it didn't seem reasonable that he would get to 25. But I can tell you this: as far as our investigations, he graded at exceptional, and is one of the highest rated guys that we've had in terms of our database.
In terms of
Character, his background, his family. You're talking about a National Merit Scholar, the salutatorian of his high school class. I mean, that's a pretty unique skill set for a guy who has been in the top 5 or 6 of his high school class from a basketball perspective his whole career. So he's got the whole package on and off the court. There's going to be a learning, phase for him. There's things we need to do skill-wise, and there were definitely bumps in the road at Carolina. I don't think he accomplished what he thought he would have when he got there. But that's why he got to 25, and it's our job to get him back up to the ceiling that we all saw when he entered Carolina back in September.
Say he's going to play in summer league with Anthony and those guys.
Yeah, Billy Branch is happy. Our summer league team's getting better by the minute. So, Jim Moran's got to defend his title. Otherwise, he might be on the hot seat.
Can you talk about him on the floor a little more, like what he does, his handle, for instance, his defensive abilities, and also whether or not someday he could be a multi-positional type player, especially defensively?
See, the old school guys always want to talk defense. Look, physically, he's a beast physically. He measures smaller, I think, than people thought in terms of height, but he's got a 7'1", 7'2" wingspan, covers a lot of ground, really fast, twitchy, gets off the floor. I think he can fight a lot of the undersized fours, in the post. He basically played 4 behind Cam Johnson at Carolina. He's got an emerging handle offensively. He's comfortable facing the hoop. He sees the game as a perimeter guy. His length is really going to be an asset. He gets deflections. He gets in passing lanes. Like I said, physically, he'll fight you. Got to get better as a team defender, in terms of IQ a little bit and instincts. That'll come with some time. But he's got a ceiling there. I think he can be multi-positional because I think he can guard up, to the small ball 4s. I think he's got the quickness laterally, and to be able to defend on the perimeter against a lot of the 3s and even some 2s at times. The bigger 2s. I think he can play with those guys. So I think it gives us a lot of switchability. With him, I think that's what he'll grow into. I think he's a great pairing, with guys like Anthony and Gary, and they're completely different. We've always tried, since I've been here, to populate the back of our bench with young emerging players that can grow into rotation guys here, guys that are too talented that if they pan out for us to maybe get in free agency or unrealistic to trade for at times. We just think, and so to have other guys that have grown like that, and have guys that can push each other like Ant and Gary and he, is going to be a real attribute for him. It's not just going to be all veterans. I mean, he has guys like, Dame and CJ and guys like that he can look up to, but he also has guys that are on the same timeline as him he can work with on a daily basis, where it's not just he's over here, set off to the side doing development. He's got a group to kind of grow with. Not dissimilar, to when it was CJ, Will Barton, Alan Crabb.
A couple more, then we're going to wrap it up.
What was the conversation like with him after the pick was made? Because for us, he talked about how it ended up being a blessing in disguise to end up with Portland because of the fit.
You mean it wasn't the outfit?
Yeah.
It wasn't. No, he really appreciative, really polite kid. Sometimes you get a guy that slips a bunch of spots, perception-wise. Whether he slipped or he clearly didn't slip. He got drafted where he was supposed to get drafted, but relative to mock drafts and preseason projections, he might have slipped. And there's times once in a while guys are salty about that, and they're harboring ill will. They're more worried about where they didn't go than where they did go. And he just felt like it was a blessing, that to get to us, to get drafted. I think he and his representatives know we have a reputation of taking care of young players here, that they're treated well, they develop, they're given an opportunity to grow. And I think, at the end of the day, I've talked to agents about this in the past, and we had a couple of kids in that we talked to about this, is don't get caught up in where you get drafted. Get caught up in who drafts you and what the plan is for you. Draft night, walking across the stage 10 picks earlier, if you're in a bad situation, they don't have a plan for you, they don't develop young players, what good does it do you? We can all point to guys, we had this conversation with Alan Crabb at one point. He thought he was a first-round pick. He went 31. He did everything he was supposed to do. 3 years later, he had $70 million. So, like I said, we think we're a great home for young players. We had multiple agents trying to steer guys to us at one point in the draft because they can see the path that these guys go on and how they're nurtured and developed. And it may take a little longer at times to get on the floor, but once they do and they've built that level of trust with the coaching staff and they're ready to contribute, there really isn't any looking back for them, and they've all succeeded.
He had said that he had struggled initially to adjust at Carolina to, some of the things that coaches want to do, where he was supposed to be on the floor and stuff. What were your thoughts on the way he adjusted during his time there, not only to what he was supposed to do on the floor, but also coming off the bench?
Well, I give him a lot of credit. Carolina's is an interest. They're a unique system. The way they play, it can be complicated at times. It's a different style than maybe they've seen in high school. What they're being asked to do is different. And they were an elite team. At times during the year, they looked like the number one team in the country, and they had seniors. They had some older guys that were playing a similar position to him. So, I give him credit. He went into North Carolina without a sense of entitlement as a guy who came in as a 6th-ranked player in America. And, at one point, there were guys when he walked out of the McDonald's practices thinking he could be a top 3 pick. So, for him to be able to sublimate his game and his desire to play more minutes and play 18 minutes at Carolina to help them win and play a little bit out of position. Most of his minutes came behind Cam Johnson at 4, some 3-man minutes sprinkled in and out. And when he got out on the floor, he competed and played at a high level. He didn't try to do too much. He didn't try to, go get numbers per se. He played the right way and he played within their system. And, like I said, they've got a unique style of basketball there, and it takes a while to adjust to it. Especially when you're used to, coming out of AAU in high school where he had the ball in his hands more. He was more of a go-to guy. He was a featured guy. And now, you're playing that early offense, early transition offense, get out, run. It's, that secondary break that they run. It takes a while to get used to it. You've got to get used to playing without the ball, which for a lot of kids coming out of the AAU system now, that's a difficult transition for guys that are used to being featured. So, I think it was a good learning experience, and it'll transition well for us. We don't have a lot of guys that play without the ball, play with the ball here. We run a lot of pick and rolls, but we also expect our perimeter players to move without the ball, share the ball, a lot of ball movement, player movement. So I think that kind of an indoctrination that he got at Carolina will serve him well when he gets into our style of play.
Neil, we're gonna wrap it up there. Can I say one more?
Yeah.
Just any emotions of having your first draft without ball?
Yeah. I don't want to get sappy, but I found out today that I had 100 voicemails on my office line because I've never used it because everybody uses my cell. And it was ironic. They went way back, right? They went way back. And there was actually one from Paul. And it was a pre-draft, email, and it just said, "Hey, it's Neil, it's Paul. Give me a call on my cell. I'll try you on your cell. Just want to talk about. I won't say who the players were because we didn't have drafted them. Want to catch up on these guys. Was watching some film." So that it's hard. I don't think there's an environment. Look, as ecstatic as he would have been sitting courtside with us going to the Western Conference Finals, and seeing that plan that was put in place 4 years ago, when we kind of reset the roster, nothing made him happier than being in this room tonight. And it was an interesting day for us today because what we do is we lock our boards in Wednesday night. We don't want any day of draft, fluctuations and second guessing and being influenced by, outside voices. And, so we sent our stuff to Jody last night and said, this is our order. This is how we're going to go. We're locked in at 25 if we don't make a move. And we played it by that script. But, we missed it because, Paul would come and, he'd stop at the pancake house and he'd have his pancakes and his apple fritter and, he'd get here around 10 and, we'd find a bunch of guys to get in the room. We'd sit here and watch film with them, and he loved watching tape. And, then we get back in the room, he'd look at the boards again, and, he'd shoot off to Powell's. He'd get bored with us, and then he would shoot off and he'd go to Powell's for a couple of hours. And he had his routine, and it was fun, and it kept us engaged because, for us, once we locked the boards in last night, we had trade calls today, and, we were receiving calls, and we kind of chummed the waters around the league the last couple of days, see if there were any deals more for July 1st, more bigger deals. But it really was a different experience for us today without Paul kind of, can we get him? Can we get him? Move up. Can we buy a second? Go ahead, but we'll give him $4 million, give him $5 million, but he's up there, he's still on the board. It just, and no matter what the plan was going in, Paul, he always said he was an all of the above guy. He'd say, well, we have these 3 guys, whichever one we get to, and he would say, well, I'm all of the above. Can we get them all? And it was different. And, I think everybody in the room felt a huge void. It just didn't have the same energy. We get not stale, Jason, but we can get a little agnostic about it. You spend 2 months working on it after the season, and you're battling and you're grinding down the board and you're watching tape and you're doing your intel and your interviews and your workouts. And after a while, you do your board, right? And then there was always this infusion of energy when Paul came in, and you had to almost start from scratch because he liked the action, right? He didn't want to know the boards were set, right? He wanted to scramble it up again,
I feel like this would have been a pick that he would have been like,
oh my God. He would have been losing it. If he would have looked and said, well, we have him over here. Can he really get to us? Can he really get to us? But, it was, we didn't have the other thing to go move up, to get Nassir. We were going to have to just have it break our way. That would have been completely unacceptable if Paul was here. Once he saw which tier he was in and what tier we were selecting from, believe me, money would have been thrown around and future seconds and whatever else we needed to do to make sure we absolutely got him, instead of being content to get the other guys we'd anticipated getting at 4 o'clock when the draft started. So, I think it's we haven't been through this grief cycle yet, right? We got through the season, then the playoffs. Now we've been through a draft, but tomorrow he would have been on a plane to Wimbledon, and tonight on the way home he would have been sending me every writer that wrote up whether we drafted well or didn't draft well, and what people were saying, and any comments, and what are your thoughts. And then we would have gotten into free agency, and have you heard from Dame? Have you heard from CJ? Do they like him? And and we talked about it tonight. It just sucks, right? For 9 months, the way things have gone over the last 9 months, he deserved that. I was down at City Hall, and I know we're going longer, Jim, but I was down at City Hall for the proclamation, that Terry and I went to, and Dwight was there, and I said, I'm glad they were recognizing how lucky the city was for all those years to have Paul, and to have a big market owner that supported this team as if we were in New York or LA. And not never considering payroll as a factor or an impediment to building a team, and driving everyone to make deals and build the roster, and and he really did do it. He really just believed in the Portland Trailblazers. It was his famous, no offense to the Seahawks, but it was his favorite property, and that was his firstborn basically, besides Microsoft. And for him not to be able to share in that, it's sad, and we've all been kind of dealing with it. It's been tough. All right, thanks, guys.